This isn't a story involving an intruder or a creeper, but the story is still haunting to me. Anyway, I'm a guy, and this happened when I was 23. One summer night, I was at my house with my two roommates, Mike and Chase. We were just laughing and talking about random stuff, and we were watching an NBA game on TV. We decided to order pizza and soda from a local pizza joint. 45 minutes later, the pizza and soda arrived at about 8:30, and when I opened the front door, I saw that the sky was green and the clouds were dark and massive. I knew right then that a storm was coming, but at first I decided to not really pay any attention to it. Then the delivery girl gave me the pizza and soda, and I paid her and gave her a tip. She had a scared look on her face. I asked her if she was okay, and she said she had to get to a safe place immediately because they had just issued a tornado warning. I had panicked a little. I told her okay and to stay safe, then she left. I told Mike and Chase what the girl told me, and they were both confused. Then a few seconds later, the emergency alert system went off on the TV. The voice on the alert said it was a tornado emergency, which is higher than a tornado warning. So we turned off the TV, took the pizza and soda with us down to the guest bedroom, the basement, which thankfully has no windows. We locked and barricaded the door with the dresser and nightstand. We sat down on the floor and turned on the TV, and we turned it on to the weather channel to stay updated on the situation. We then heard the sirens going off outside. Mike and Chase were starting to panic, but I told them we were going to be okay. My mom called me and asked if my roommates and I were okay. I told her that we were in the guest bedroom in the basement. She then told me that she was in her basement bathroom and told us to be safe. We had then heard things outside crashing and being blown around. Then we heard a rumble that sounded like a freight train, and the house began shaking, and we heard the wind getting really violent. We were all freaking out. I know this will probably sound a little dramatic, but to me it honestly felt apocalyptic. We tried to stay calm though, since panicking would only make it worse, so we went to eat the pizza and just continued watching the TV to try and take our minds off of it. After a while, it had started to settle a little bit, but we still stayed in the room for about 2 more hours just to be on the safe side. After 2 hours, we had decided to go have a look outside. When we got outside, the damage was chaotic. There were a couple of cars smashed and a couple of other cars flipped upside down. A couple of trees were uprooted. A couple of blocks away on another street, we saw a downed power line and a few houses were badly damaged. Our house thankfully only had minor damage. Just a little bit of siding was blown off, just like a couple of the other houses too. The next day, my mom called and asked if we were okay, and I told her we were. She was really glad that we weren't hurt. The damage to our house was eventually repaired, and I really hope to never go through that again. I'm a 15-year-old female from Pennsylvania. My parents decided to take me to a lake that I'm familiar with to go fishing. We go fishing a lot, and honestly, it can get kind of boring regarding how impatient I am. I asked my mom if I could have a friend come with us so that I would be less bored and would have more fun. For the sake of this story, I'm going to refer to my friend as M. We arrived at the lake at around 7 p.m. and the weather wasn't too horrible, but we knew it was most likely going to rain. We fished in the rain before, so we didn't really think anything of it. We were fishing for about an hour so far when the thunder and lightning had started. The lightning wasn't too bad at first until it started to be constant. Em and I decided to go sit in the car considering that it was most likely going to rain pretty soon, and just honestly, we weren't really catching anything. Here's a little context for the next part. The lake had 2 parts, the front part and the back part. To get to the lakes, you had to go down a very steep hill that was muddy and slippery even when it was dry. About 5 minutes after we got into the car, it started to rain. It wasn't horrible rain, but I knew it was going to get progressively worse. I called my mom and asked her if she was almost ready to leave considering it was about to pour, and at that point I just wanted to get the hell out of there. Em and I sat in the car for another 10 minutes, and all of a sudden we had heard the emergency broadcast reporting that a tornado was going to be in our area. Em and I didn't really think much of it because 99% of the time it's really nothing to worry about. Em made a joke saying, "We should get out just in case the tornado comes for us and rolls the car down the hill." I'm now so glad we didn't do that. Not even 3 minutes after that warning was sent, a giant tree crashes into the car. My fight or flight kicked in, and I attempted to open the door really fast, but it was blocked. I managed to get the door open just the slightest bit. I yelled for my mother. Honestly, I yelled for anyone at that point, but nobody came. But now I know why. As soon as I looked out the window, I saw people running, trees falling, and heavy rain. I'd screamed and yelled for my mother, but no response. My adrenaline was rushing at this point, and I went into a full-on panic attack. Emmett started crying, and this just made it 10 times worse. Finally, I get the door open halfway, and I yell for my mom and dad one more time. I hear my dad yelling that they're trying to get up the hill, but it's too slippery, and he told me to get out of the car. I didn't know what to do. My heart was racing. All I heard was trees falling, wind, thunder, and Em scream crying at this point. My dad and mom somehow managed to get up the hill. They opened the door, and my mother's face was probably the scariest thing of this whole story. Em and I jumped out of the car, and what we saw scarred me for life. Trees knocked down on top of cars, people running, and just the look on everyone's faces. My dad had somehow managed to get into the car to try and get it out from under the tree. It didn't matter how much damage the car was, we needed to get out of there. My mother was going into a full-on anxiety attack at this point. This made me start crying, because seeing her scared made me even more scared. After my dad managed to get the car from under the tree, we hauled the hell out of there. We couldn't stay in that area considering we were surrounded by woods. I was still crying after leaving the lake, but luckily everyone was okay and no one at the lake was injured. I know this probably doesn't seem that scary, but being a 15-year-old girl in a car with a tree collapsed on top of it, not knowing what to do or where your mother was, I can assure you it's terrifying. Okay, so this is part 2, and this is from the perspective of my friend Em. I'm Em. My friend submitted her side of the story, so now it's time to start mine. My friend C had picked me up to go fishing with her and her parents, and we thought nothing of the storm coming through. We finally got there. A tournament was happening, so there were a bunch of people there. Me, C, and her dad walked down this steep hill to go pay to fish. While doing that, we had bought a couple of things we needed in order to fish. We walked back up that hill to go get her mom and all of the other fishing equipment that we needed. After all of that, we walked down the hill to find a place to fish, and we finally found a place, so we sat down and started fishing. About a couple of hours into fishing, C and I got bored and it was dark out, and we weren't really catching anything. It had started to sprinkle and the wind was really strong at this point. C and I went to the car, and about 10 minutes later, C and I got tornado warnings, to which C then says, "Should we believe it?" To which I reply back with, "No, we don't even usually get tornadoes." Well, after that, the wind got really strong. C and I heard 2 loud bangs, and we thought it was her dad, so we looked in the trunk because her parents have a 3-row car. The back row was down. We looked behind us and looked forward, and there was now a tree right on top of her car, and we start freaking out. As I'm having a panic attack, C tries to get out of the car. I say, "No, stay here." At that point, trees start falling left and right, and C had started to have a panic attack too because her parents weren't at the car yet. C yells for her mom while it's pouring rain. Her dad couldn't find her mom, and that's what took them so long to get to the car. They finally made it back to the car, and her dad gets the tree off the car and we try to leave, but the main entrance is covered with trees and we couldn't get out. We had then remembered that there was a second exit, so we got out finally. On our way home, there was a tree blocking the road. Several cars were stopped around the tree. C's dad gets out to help move them, but they couldn't get it. We then turn around and take the back roads. We eventually and finally got home safely, soaked and cold, but at least we were okay. I was 20 when this happened. For some context, I'm a guy. I was home alone one summer evening. My roommate Alex was on a shift at Target, so I had the house all to myself. I was relaxing in my bedroom wearing just a t-shirt and briefs, listening to music. After about an hour, I had turned on the Weather Channel, and it said we were in the path of a destructive tornado, and that it had touched down. I looked out my window, and the sky looked very darn gray, especially considering that it wasn't even 7 o'clock yet. And in the distance, I saw it. There was a huge tornado on the ground, and the sirens were already going off. My house didn't have a basement, so I had to get out of the house. I was still in my shirt and underwear, but I didn't have time to put any pants on because the tornado was heading right for me, so I got in my car and drove off. I drove for miles into the middle of nowhere and parked next to the side of the road, sat there for about half an hour. Then I saw the tornado come close behind me. So I drove to the other part of the intersection, got out of my car, and then went into a ditch. I lay down there flat and face down, and I put my hands over my head and neck for protection. I was probably laying there for about 45 minutes. Then the noise stopped, and I looked up and the tornado had passed. I got back to my car, which thankfully had no damage whatsoever. I then got in and drove home. When I got home, there was actually no damage, thankfully, but a couple of other houses were damaged badly. I then saw Alex pull in the driveway. He was done with his shift at the time. He got out and asked why I was outside in just my shirt and briefs. I told him I didn't put any pants on before leaving the house when I saw the tornado because I just wanted to save time. To which he said he understood, and then we both went inside. We continued on with our night, and that was it. He was glad I was all right, and I told him the same. It was eventually confirmed to have been a level 3 tornado on the enhanced Fujita scale. To this day, Alex and I are thankful that nobody was killed or seriously injured, because it really could have been way worse. Thank God it wasn't. My name is Jerry. This happened to me back in 2011 when I was 20 years old. It was a Sunday, January 9th, 2011. Me and my friends were all supposed to go back to school that week, but we got a call from the school saying that there's a fire at the school, so we couldn't go back until the next week. During that week, I'd called my girlfriend Rihanna. She asked me if I heard the news about the fire at the school, and of course I said yes that I did. I got the news when I got to the airport that Sunday afternoon. During that week, I was just at home hoping that the school would be okay from the fire when we got back the next week. The school principal had us go down to the auditorium for a meeting about what happened the week before the week of the fire, which was Sunday, January 9th, 2011. When he was talking, I couldn't believe what happened. I could still smell the smoke from the fire downstairs in my classroom. The fire happened upstairs on the upper floor of the school. A bunch of the stuff was damaged. The computers were completely melted. The windows from the back room with glass out of the front of the school area. After the fire, though, another disaster actually happened to us. It was probably one of the scariest things that ever happened to me and my friends at school. They were calling for a severe thunderstorm in our area which was capable of producing a possible tornado. When we were sitting in class, we heard over their intercom system that there was a tornado warning in the Bradford area. My girlfriend Rihanna was upstairs in her classroom. I ran right up there right before the storm to tell her what was going on. She panicked a little bit, but I told her to calm down. We all had to go down underneath. There was a tunnel area. It was a big room with no windows, and so nothing could fall on us. But while we were down there, we had heard a loud, humongous rumble in the ground above us. The building started to shake, and I realized that the tornado was now on the ground. My girlfriend started to scream, but I calmed her down. My classmate Megan was also down there with us as well. She too was crying, but I told her that everything's gonna be okay. We didn't even know when the tornado went in because there was no intercom system, because when the storm hit, the power went all out of the school building. So there was no power down where we were, down in the space below the school. But finally, everything had ended. It was all okay now to go back upstairs to our classrooms and continue on with the day. Thank you for letting me share my story of my disaster here. My boyfriend, now husband, left town to care for his mother. An hour later, the town south of us had a tornado warning. I quickly calculated, and sure enough, he was spot on to be in the middle of the tornado zone. So I called him, a lot, but no answer. About an hour later, he called me. He then said, "Hey babe, I was just in a tornado." And then it clicked. The call disconnected, and I couldn't reach him again. All I kept telling myself was he said it was past tense, so he's okay, right? 3 hours later, he called me again. He was at a friend's house 2 hours away. I went to him. Surreal. His truck looked just fine from far away. Upon closer inspection, all of the windows were imploded. Not 1 millimeter of the exterior nor the interior was without a scrape from shrapnel. There were blades of grass stuck between the headlight plastic and the frame that held the plastic covering. Then I saw him in person. The entire back of his body was just like his truck. Far away, he was fine. Close up, there was not a millimeter of space without a mark of shrapnel. He was bleeding from his ears. He was temporarily deaf. He was most definitely in shock. It turns out he saw the tornado approaching while he was driving 65 miles per hour on the highway. He couldn't outrun it, so he stopped beside a field, took his dog, and laid down as flat as he could on the ground beside the truck. He said as the tornado went over him, he saw trees get uprooted and shoot horizontally across the highway. The tension wires were snapped and flailing all around him. The force took his feet up into the air and shook him like a baby. He saw his truck when the windows imploded and got lifted up to 4 feet into the air, moved 20 feet forward, and sat back down. When the tornado passed, he got back in his truck and saw the tornado come back at him. This time, however, it had fizzled out before his eyes. So it was a rare F4 to F5, and it did millions of damage to the small town it hit. He was in the local paper as a hero for saving his dog. To this day, 5 years later, he says with a tear in his eye that it wasn't him who saved the dog, because without the dog he was protecting, he would have let go and got sucked into the tornado. It was the dog that saved him. May 31st, 2013, the most stressful night of my life. The night of the El Reno tornado. I wasn't chasing, but rather at home in Norman. As soon as I saw the storm start moving south, an extremely unusual path by the way, I packed a go bag and went to the National Weather Center. The atmosphere was light, and someone joked that their friend needed to move before they got hit by the tornado. A few minutes later, we all went silent as pictures of the Weather Channel truck had hit Twitter after the tornado tossed it. We were speechless, and we stood on the roof watching the bright blue sky of transformers exploding in South Oklahoma City. As the storm moved into Norman, a few of us looked for a place to watch the storm after security kicked us off the roof and settled on an office overlooking the parking lot. Within a matter of minutes, cars started streaming in and filling the parking lot, with more parking haphazardly in the lanes. People tried to come in the closest door, but we pointed them down to the main entrance. Federal building. Security is serious. The last people to come to the door were a couple, with the woman heavily pregnant. I let them in rather than forcing them to walk away any further through the window and rain. Eventually, the worst of the storm had passed, and we were all told it was safe to leave. My drive out of the weather center was the single physically darkest moment of my life. Even with my car's headlights, I swear I couldn't see the road in front of me. I barely made it past the basketball stadium when I heard the sharp crack of hail hitting my windshield. I ducked into a Sonic, and the employee let me and another driver into the kitchen for safety. After the second round of hail ended, I was able to make it home. I was in the E of 5 Oak Grove tornado in 1998, and it was hell. I had a bad feeling all day long that it was going to be bad, and it was. I was staying with my great-grandmother while my parents were on a trip in Kentucky, and all I remember was it was dark, and the lights were going on and off. When the siren started sounding, we walked to the basement, and as soon as we got down, it was on us. I had just closed my eyes and covered my ears when the basement door blew in. You could feel nothing but hard cold air blowing on you, and then it was gone. I got up and I was so afraid. I was walking and my legs were shaking so bad that I had to sit down. A funny thing was that my grandmother had just turned 100 years old earlier that week, and she just laughed at the door and all the debris out in the driveway, and she just said, "Well, Lord, I reckon it isn't my time." She actually lived to be 103. My cousin was a police officer in the Phil Campbell EF5 tornado. He recorded it, and there's actually a video on YouTube of it as it struck. I know a lot of people who have suffered total house losses, and one that lost her life doing everything right and still ended up dying. I guess that's just life. I remember the Palm Sunday tornado outbreak of April 11, 1965, when the National Weather Service issued a blanket tornado warning for all of the northern half of Indiana. I was 10 years old, and I walked up to the top of a hill on North Walnut Avenue in Bloomington, looked north at a supercell thunderstorm which resembled a nuclear warhead blast with an overshooting anvil. That tornado was an EF4, which was pounding Lebanon and on its way to Russiaville, which would be obliterated. While the storms were moving southwest to northeast, the entire system was dropping south. When I got back home, my parents had set up the rollaway beds in the basement. It was a long night, and I learned we didn't go back upstairs until after 2 a.m. I also remember the 1974 super outbreak, where so many tornadoes were touching down at the same time that the National Weather Service issued another blanket tornado warning, this time for the entire state. The rolling messages across the bottom of the television screen just added to the terror. Nobody knew if our town was going to be the next one hit by a tornado. The next weekend we had an ice storm, just what one needs while cleaning up storm damage. I was in Austin when the 1997 EF5 struck in Gerald, just to the north of Austin. An EF4 tornado struck 8 miles away, and I remember the sky literally turning green as the storms moved in. Our swimming pool furniture was picked up by the wind and then deposited into the swimming pool, except for the umbrella which we found up in a tree 3 blocks away. My partner was about 3 miles away from the Gerald tornado in Georgetown, and he told me that pieces of live oak trees were hitting the roof of the place where he worked. The roof was severely damaged. My first run-in with a twister was when I was 4 years old, staying at Grandma's house. What I mainly remember was playing outside with Grandpa, and then Grandma suddenly running outside and yelling at us to get in the house. There was a tornado coming. I had no idea what a tornado was at the time, but as we ran to the house, the weather went from calm to extremely windy on a dime. I remember nearly getting blown over and getting pelted by dust and leaves as we reached the porch. The power was out, and I remember the wind getting really loud for quite some time. After things calmed down, we went back outside and found trash and debris everywhere, and the big pine tree in the front yard had been uprooted and knocked over. No real damage to the house though. Apparently the tornado had just barely missed it. Neighbors' houses were all fine as well, so it really seemed that everyone got lucky. I didn't really know exactly what happened until we saw it on the news the next day. It was apparently a pretty big deal, as tornadoes are extremely rare where I live. Footage of the twister was shown, and my grandma specifically pointed it out and said, "See, that's what a tornado looks like." And I found myself completely entranced by it. There was just something fascinating as well as terrifying to little old me about a killer cloud coming down from the heavens to destroy everything in its path. It wasn't long before I officially fell down the tornado rabbit hole, and movies like Twister became my favorites. The tornado was rated an F1, and on the news it appeared as a highly visible skinny brown funnel chewing through the trees. It was scary. April 2nd, 2006, an F3 tornado hit Hopkinsville, Kentucky. I was in a 2003 Chevy Avalanche with my mom and dog. We were in town on our way home from picking up my dog from a sitter. We had just got back from vacation. It was dark out around 8:30 p.m. when out of nowhere we found ourselves in the path of what would eventually be rated as an F3. My mom immediately had started panicking. She called my dad and asked where we should hide because we were literally in the middle of nowhere. She told Dad that there was an overpass up ahead and that we were going to get out and take shelter in the overpass. My dad is an EMT and he told her absolutely not, unless she wanted to get us killed or seriously injured. So my mom drove. Definitely not the safest course of action. I was 5, so I really didn't understand what was going on. I remember my dog, who was a long-haired Chihuahua, was in my lap in my booster seat. The way he was sitting was like trying to hold me in the booster seat. At one point it lifted our car and then just sat us back down. We made it to my grandma's and my dad was looking out the window and just saw the tree beside the house sway like it was going to hit our car. My mom then immediately grabbed me and the dog and we ran inside to get into the basement. I remember that it just sounded like a freight train and I didn't understand what was going on and why everything was so loud. Not even 2 minutes after we got in the house, the tree fell on the car and it would have killed us. That was my first experience, and I didn't really grow with fascination towards tornadoes until probably the December 2021 tornadoes in Kentucky. That was my first tornado as an adult, and I really understood just how dangerous the situation was, and how lucky everyone on campus was, including myself, because the tornado curved its path right before hitting campus. Ultimately, it ended up turning and going down the US 31 bypass. I helped with recovery efforts and search and rescue. I unfortunately discovered people who were no longer with us and were very mutilated by the storm. My fascination really just came to understand my trauma. I think I'm still too afraid to chase a storm at this moment, but one day I hope I'll be able to. For me, learning about these phenomena and trying to understand them helped me deal with the survivor's guilt, as well as the PTSD that I'd gotten from this tornado. I now take all of the facts that I know about tornadoes, and I make them kid-friendly to help the kids that are ultimately traumatized by that storm that I currently work with to this day. We had a very bad thunderstorm, and we're under a tornado watch. The kids were terrified and sobbing. The only way I calmed them down was to tell them cool facts about tornadoes, and also remind them that we were safe. It breaks my heart that these kids were so little when the storm happened, and they are still very much affected to this day. I would say that a good 75% of the kids that I have are old enough to remember the storm, or they're terrified of any sort of thunderstorm. I've actually got 2 stories. May 3rd, 1999 in the Oklahoma City area in eastern Oklahoma County. I knew that we were in trouble when our longtime meteorologist for the Oklahoma City area said,
"I don't think I've ever seen anything like this."
The storm was in Chickasha at the time. We didn't have a storm shelter, so we got into the bathroom at the center of the house. Just before the storm hit, it got eerily quiet, like the birds started singing briefly. Then, it sounded like a bomb went off. The entire house and walls shook. Then it got quiet again. My then husband left the bathroom and was walking around in the house, but he didn't say anything for the longest time. I finally asked, "Is it safe for us to come out?" He responded, "I'm in our daughter's bedroom. I can see the sky." The roof was shaken off the north side of the house. The east wall was bowed in, concave. When the insurance adjuster came out, he said the structural integrity was so severely compromised that the house would have to be rebuilt from the ground up. Now for my second story. May 8th, 2003 in Oklahoma City, because of course, the day my divorce had became final, plus it was my birthday. I was driving home to pick up my daughters from daycare, and I had started hearing the tornado sirens. This time I was taking my daughter and me to a storm shelter at a local school. On the way to the local elementary school, the emergency broadcast system was broadcasting on all the radio channels, giving the location of the storm in our immediate area. We arrived at the school and saw lots of people just standing around outside in the parking lot. Extremely strange. I parked my car and several of them ran up to me asking, Do you have the key?" "The key to what?" I asked. "The key to the storm shelter in the basement. It's locked and we can't get in," I countered. "Have you called the principal of the school?" At that moment, the emergency broadcast system broke in again. The tornado was bearing down at us, and the sky was almost black. I made a snap decision. I yelled at my kids to get back in the car. I wasn't waiting around for someone who might not even arrive with a tornado less than 5 minutes away. Once we were all in the car, I peeled out of the parking lot and got back on the road. "Where are we going?" my oldest daughter asked. "Anywhere but here," I replied. I remembered my tornado safety rules when driving away from a tornado. Drive away from the storm at right angles. The storm was headed east/northeast. I headed due west at the next intersection. I drove through hail, high winds with roofing material swirling around us. Things got really gnarly. Then after driving about 15 minutes, I hit the edge of the storm where there was brilliant sunshine. "Well, kids, we can't go back home, and it'll be a while before we can. Want to go to Barnes & Noble on the west side of town?" I asked them. "Yeah, let's go to the bookstore," they said. So I kept driving across Oklahoma City to the Barnes & Noble at Quail Springs, where we hung out for about 3 hours. Went to my dad's house after that and had a nice visit. Around 9:30 p.m., I thought we needed to try and drive back home. "Well, if your house isn't there anymore, you're welcome to come back and stay with us," my dad offered. I gave my dear old dad a hug and drove back home. Through some miracle, not only was our house still there, but it still had electricity. We were really grateful for that. July 2021. I was at my now fiance's house and we knew there was a storm coming in. We were at a decently high risk level from the SPC. We'd gone outside to take pictures of the clouds and watch the sky as things rolled in, and eventually sat down on the porch as the rest of it rolled in. The clouds were this shade of blue. It was a very eerie color, and I knew it was light refracting through the hail in the storm. But the moment I won't forget is when the wind went from quiet to just slowly increasing to a roar. It wasn't even that slow, but it wasn't a snap of your fingers change either. It just picked up and kept picking up until it sounded like a train about to hit, and I told my fiance we should probably go inside because that was the exact sound we'd heard that accompanies a tornado. So we did and found out the power was out. My fiance was video recording the backyard when we went in, where trees were whipping around like crazy and the rain was pounding the windows. And we confirmed later hail had hit the house. Rewatching it, there's a point where leaves and I think cardboard pieces for some reason, if memory serves right, are up 3-ish stories in the air and swirling around just outside the window. I'm pretty sure we actually caught the funnel or whatever on video too. There's a specific part of the video where you can see trees almost bending in half, and a major change in intensity that tracks through the backyard. We then gathered all the animals and everyone and went down to the basement to wait it out. I was a little freaked out because the power being out meant my crappy phone plan lost data and I couldn't see radar. So I was without any information on where and what the storm was doing. Once it died down, we all went back upstairs and outside and looked around. The front yard had a trash can knocked down and blown around, and leaves and branches were strewn all around. A plastic lawn chair had gotten tossed. The backyard, well, the most obvious thing was a giant oak tree had been uprooted and fallen. It was pointing to the west with our backs to the house. Just to the right of it, a tree was twisted and partially wrapped around another tree at a 90-degree angle to the one that had fallen. And there were a few other trees in other directions, like they had been pulled around like a funnel had come through. We could see the path in the trees where whatever had come through had gone because of the missing tree branches and stuff. The NWS isn't going to be able to confirm or deny if it was a funnel, I don't think. They did confirm though that they couldn't discern a tornado path, but a wind event with wind speeds equivalent of an EF1 tornado did occur. I think it was a funnel that couldn't quite form back up, as the cell that hit us had produced 2 tornadoes earlier in the day up further north in the state. Anyways, that was an insanely cool and scary storm, and I'm just glad it didn't hit worse. It was bad enough as it was. About 5 years ago, a tornado cut a path through the city I lived in. I'll admit I was actually 2 towns over at the time, so I was never really in any danger, but it cuts right through where my grandparents live. I was at Costco when my mom had told me that 3 trees had fallen on my grandparents' house. We tried driving there but got like half a mile past my house before the traffic just stopped dead. I proceeded to run several miles until I got to their street. The short way was blocked by firefighters who weren't allowing anyone to pass because of the downed power lines. They hadn't gotten to blocking off the long way yet. It was much worse. I traversed about 2 miles of what felt like a war zone. I climbed over fallen trees and army crawled under power lines. I found out later on that they were still alive at the time, so that was certainly very dangerous. It felt like I was playing Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 again. Houses were just ripped in half. Actually, I specifically remember thinking that it reminded me of pictures of the Haiti earthquake. I get to my grandparents' house, and this whole time I'm expecting it to just be gone. It actually wasn't too bad. There were some small to medium-sized holes in the roof, but nothing that couldn't be repaired. Windows were blown out, and my grandma was hysterical. Best part was another 2 houses down, and you wouldn't even know. They ended up with a massive insurance settlement, and now they have a house worth probably double what it was before. After helping out there, I had walked to my high school, which was maybe about 2 streets over. The place looked like it was bombed. Emergency services hadn't even gotten there yet. So I just walked right into one of the blown out windows up to the top floor and just right on the roof. 5 years later, and they still haven't rebuilt that school, at least as far as I know. Okay, so it's a little long, so bear with me. While it was an extremely traumatic event, I still consider us lucky because it could have been so much worse. We'll get to that later. So it was Memorial Day weekend, and I was off the weekend, but I had to work Monday night. We went up to my parents' place at Marblehead, Lake Erie. We came back Monday afternoon in time for me to get to work. I work evenings at McDonald's as a manager while also going to school for nursing. My husband had been laid off a month prior, but he was doing Uber and Shipt to make money while he looked for a job. So despite that, we were in a good place and things were going well. At work that night, there was going to be another manager, and I knew we were going to be slow. So I tried calling off, but my boss convinced me to go in because the other manager was still kind of new, even though she was pretty capable of doing her job. I don't remember the exact time, but it was probably around 10 p.m. when I had started getting notifications on my phone about severe weather and a tornado in the area. Didn't think much of it. The storms that hit the Dayton area usually produce tiny tornadoes, something that might shake the leaves off a tree, but nothing major. If anything, the storm might drop a tornado east of the area in the country, like the Xenia tornado of '74. I logged into Facebook because we were indeed dead at work and bored. I saw some friends reposting a video of one of the chief meteorologists at a news station basically yelling at the viewers for wanting to get back to The Bachelorette when it was an extremely dangerous situation. I began texting my husband as well as got in contact with my boss. She said there's a tornado on the ground heading east, but she wasn't sure how big it was. Around 10:45 p.m., we kicked out the 2 customers we had and closed the restaurant down early. I went outside around 11 p.m. to see what was going on. We knew that the tornado was headed towards the Beaver Creek area, but tornadoes will do what they want and could end up wherever. I remember it was windy and there were lots and lots of lightning. I went back inside shortly after, and we took shelter in the bathroom. During this time, I was also in contact with my husband. We knew that he needed to take cover with the children. The problem was we didn't have a basement in our tiny townhouse. He joked about cutting a hole in the wall under the stairs, and honestly, that is something I considered in the past when serious storms came through but never produced anything. All of a sudden, he texts me to take shelter. He tells me that he loves me and that they're getting hit. I of course freak out a little bit, hoping that he means just rain, but I can't get a hold of him. For 45 minutes, I waited for word. I tried to stay calm, hoping that the worst didn't happen, and maybe there's just no power or something. Finally, we're able to get in contact, but the reception is spotty. He says we got hit. I ask how bad it was, and he says,
You need to come home. We can't live here anymore.
Of course, I'm like, oh crap. Sorry, coworkers, I gotta go. We've been hit. I called my boss and told her that my house got hit, and that I left for the night because I gotta get home to my family. I worked less than 2 miles from where I lived. It usually took me 10 minutes at most to get home. This night, it took me over 30 minutes. There were so many large trees, branches, and power lines down. Plus, it was dark as crap, so it was extremely difficult to find my way around. My neighborhood was like 2 out of 3 neighborhoods all connected with multiple ways in and out. All but one were blocked. I finally made it to that entrance. I didn't know it was open, just luck. I parked about a block away from my house just in case my road was bad. The scene was straight out of a movie. It was pitch black, but there were still tons and tons of debris everywhere. My first thought was finding my family. I knew that they had taken shelter with some neighbors around the corner from us, but I couldn't remember which house number it was. Furiously, I headed to the area that I thought they might be, passing my house/unit. I could barely make out the damage in the dark, but it wouldn't register until the next day. With the power out, the cell service wasn't great, but I managed to find him and my children. Some neighbors let us sit with them while the fire department made sure the gas was off and not a threat. They just had their windows blown out, so their house was in much better shape than ours. Okay, so this is part 2. Here we go. So we had lived in this townhouse for 7 years. Our final year of college, we'd moved in together. We got married, adopted a 7-year-old cat, had a baby, adopted a dog, and then had another baby. We went through the grief of losing a baby in this house and losing my father-in-law. We dealt with job losses and promotions. We had lots of good times and lots of bad times as well. While we only rented it, it was still our house. So my husband takes me to the unit where he's sheltering with some neighbors. The first thing my 3-year-old says to me is, "Mom, I was super brave during the emergency." Oh my gosh, if my heart didn't break into a million pieces when I heard that. I just held my children close. We were there for about an hour to an hour and a half when the fire department made sure the risk of gas leaks and explosions were totally gone. One of the guys in that unit is a Redditor, so if he sees this, thank you for letting my family and my dog sit with you. The cat was fine as well. Both animals a little shaken up, but who wouldn't be? My husband just couldn't take the cat with him at the time. After we got the all clear, the neighbors offered to sit with our kids while we went back to our unit and gathered up a few things. Since we had just gotten back from our weekend away, we luckily still had our suitcase packed. We had a 2007 Mercury Mountaineer as our family car, and a Chrysler 200 as our nice car, which is what my husband used for Uber and shipped. Luckily that night I took the Chrysler to work, but our Mountaineer was a total loss. Since it was so old, we just had liability on it. But damn if that thing wasn't a freaking tank. It had the crap beat out of it and lost a mirror and a couple of windows, a windshield wiper, and the top rack was ripped apart, but it didn't move an inch. All the other cars in that area were beaten to hell and had been moved by the wind, but this thing stood firm. My husband thinks it possibly helped keep them safe. They were in the downstairs bathroom, which had 2 outside walls. He thinks the SUV kind of took the brunt of the damage, but all of the units in our area didn't have much damage to the bricks, though the others in the neighborhood did. But what I wouldn't do to have that car back. Anyways, we gathered a few essentials that we could find in the dark. Even with our cell phone lights, it was still hard to see all of the damage and find anything. Since we had no power, obviously, I had to grab all of my breast milk out of the freezer and fridge. You know you're a breastfeeding mom when the first thing you think about after a tornado is making sure you grab your milk. My husband somehow made it upstairs and got a beautiful cross stitch that my grandmother made us for our wedding. I was able to look upstairs, but there were walls and large pieces of ceiling all over the stairs and upstairs. I wanted to go upstairs to see the damage, but it would have to wait until morning. I tell you, it was very strange looking up my stairs and seeing nothing. The sky was so dark and dusty, it just looked like a void. I grabbed my poor cat and put him in one of our diaper bags because I didn't have a cat carrier. The poor thing was so scared that he had diarrheaed in the bag. We loaded up our 200 with a few essential things, because honestly, we didn't know if and when we'd be back. A shelter somewhere nearby had been made for people, but my parents were only an hour away, and since we had 2 small children plus a cat and a dog, I knew it would be more comfortable for us to go there. And the sirens were still going off, and the possibility of another tornado really scared us, so going to my parents was the safest thing for us. My dad went to Mayher in the middle of the night to get litter and food for my cat, bless his heart. Some people are like, I can't believe you got your cat like that. I mean, he's my responsibility. It's not fair to him if I leave him behind. I'm one of those people that will do whatever it takes to make sure my animals come with us if we have to flee. I'll never forget that night. The smell of the air was something I'll never forget. It's hard to describe it, but the best I can come up with is the smell of sawdust, dirt, and must. The air was so still. Not even the slightest rustle. I had never seen or experienced such stillness, and it was quiet. Even when I worked 2 to 3 in the morning, it was never this quiet. It's like the sound had been sucked right up with the tornado. It was very surreal, and I literally felt like I was dreaming or in a movie. This is a time where you literally cannot believe your eyes as you're living it. It was a very tough time for my family and I for a while, so to bring this to a full close, after some time we eventually ended up moving to Columbus, and then my husband got a job up in Mount Gilead about an hour north, and we've been here since January. We miss Beaver Creek and Dayton tons, but we're doing really well now. I hope that you're all doing well also. What a crazy night that was. Washington EF4. I have stories I could tell that would take hours. I found a guy whose house was destroyed and he was laying in a pile of debris right across the road 100 yards. Called paramedics over from down the road where they had a fatality. The guy I found was severely injured. Broken femur, broken shoulder, punctured lung, huge gash on his head, but he made a full recovery after 6 months or so. I work in ortho surgery and talked to some of the staff who treated him, and my son knew his stepdaughter. He was the first one to the hospital after the tornado and the last one to leave. He would have died like his neighbor did if I hadn't found him and got help. I visited him a couple of times in the hospital and would occasionally see him around. Came to town to my house where there was nothing left and nothing I could do, and was leaving to meet my family when someone found the neighbor a few doors down in the rubble of his house. He was a 300-pound mentally challenged guy laying on his side and surrounded by debris. It started raining pretty hard again, so I knelt down over him with my umbrella. The whole right side of his face was plastered with fine debris and mud. Even his ear hole was filled with it. When we had enough people, we lifted him onto a door and carried him out of the debris pile to a pickup truck. 3 weeks later, when I returned to work, I was part of the OR team that fixed his broken leg. Never saw him again. I heard that my neighbor across the street, a really mean old lady by the way, had been in her basement when everything collapsed, and she was hit in the head or face by a falling brick facade. Apparently they got her to the triage, and she coded the ambulance en route to the hospital, but they resuscitated her and she lived. This all happened on my way back into town. I never actually saw the tornado. I am an amateur chaser and knew how bad it could be that day, so I went out and headed towards Springfield towards the first warned storm from earlier. My wife and kids were home but went into the basement of our house. She called me asking if there were tornadoes nearby and said she could see debris before they went to the basement. At this point, I had turned around like 15 miles from home and did 100 miles per hour in my little Tacoma. She called me back to say they were fine, but the house was badly damaged. I should say at this point that we had 2 houses. We had been renting a 3-story duplex townhouse, and the week before we had purchased a house and hadn't moved in yet. That Sunday was going to be the big moving day. The houses were about a mile apart. The tornado went about 150-ish yards southeast of the new house where the family was in the basement. The roof was gone and the garage walls were gone. The center of the tornado was about 100 yards northwest of the townhouse duplex. Its tall profile took all of the wind and was completely destroyed, even taking the flooring off the first floor. Most of our personal belongings were never found.